For the base of this build, I'm using the same Cage Rager from Privateer Press that I did for a previous Orc Warboss. But this time, instead of taking him into the future and converting him into an Orc, I'll be converting him into an Uruk Warboss. I started by cutting off the Cage Rager's original arms with this pair. They're from Zealot Miniatures Miniature General and fit strangely well onto the Cage Rager, both in terms of musculature and width. With them firmly glued and green stuff into place, I started orcifying the Cage Rager by sinking in the neck and backplate from the Megaboss kit. I also carved out a lot of his chest and collarbone so I could fit in place the Megaboss chest plate. It doesn't cover him as fully as it does the Megaboss, but still fits fairly well and armors the important bits. I didn't glue it on just yet though, so I could carve off the front of his belt. This is the armored skirt thing from a brute that I upsized through molding and casting. I'd originally been planning on layering on the Megaboss one, but this one fit better, though I still had to carve off portions. I glued it in place and sculpted green stuff above it to look like an armored plate. I knew it wouldn't be particularly visible under the weapon pole, so I didn't worry too much that it looked kind of rough. While I was at it, I used more green stuff to continue my Uruk's breastplate higher up his shoulders. No Megaboss is complete without his kicks, and my plan was to replace the Cage Rager's bare feet with those for the Megaboss kit, at least the toe portion anyway. I snipped off his toes and carved down the sides of his shins so I could later sculpt armor over it. When I had a good fit, I glued the Megaboss toes to either side. I layered on Procreate and sculpted it into rough armor plates. In retrospect, they weren't that bad, but I disliked them at the time and would continually iterate on his shin armor throughout the build. To his right arm, I glued on the bracers from the Maw Crusher Megaboss. I used the pauldrons from the same kit for either shoulder, though I put them on essentially backwards because I preferred the spikes going forward. I also hung the chainmail harvested from an ogre gut plate to hang from them, but later got rid of them so I could increase the swollenness of his biceps. The Ironjawz portion of the Megaboss breastplate was looking a bit odd to me. Essentially, the problem is that it's designed for a Megaboss who's leaning forward, not standing straight like mine. To fix the problem, I split the Ironjawz halfway, cut off some of the angled portion, and glued the two pieces back together so the teeth would be less in the face of my Megaboss. It's not that visible here, but the pauldrons of the Megaboss weren't quite large enough for the Cage Rager, so I cheated a bit by using a mix of Procreate and clay to sculpt in what looked like overlapping plates of armor. To me, the new style Uruk armor has a kind of crustacean quality to it, and overlapping plates fit both that aesthetic while also making it look like his shoulders were fully covered. I took care to try and give it the same crudely hammered texture of their armor and flare up the edges. It was time to arm my Warboss, so I fit his hands into their wrists. Because of his size, there were only a few weapons that would fit his bulk. The most obvious was the axe from the standard Megaboss. It wasn't bad, but looked a little plain and small. I liked better how the brute mace looked, but it just wasn't quite large enough. Third, and last, was the two-handled blade from the brute kit. It had the problem of sticking out pretty far from the rest of the figure, and also that spears just aren't that cool. I didn't love any of these options, so I channeled my inner Uruk and handled it the way an Uruk would. When you have a problem, apply more axe. I cut down the blade from one Megaboss axe and glued it to another to create a double-headed axe. Using a paperclip, I pinned it to the haft of the polearm. This created a weapon of savage brutality, but was it enough savage brutality? No. To increase both savagery and brutality, I took the brute mace, snipped off one of the rings of spikes, and pinned it to the butt of the axe. I eventually ended up cutting off another of the rings later because it looked more natural that way. With both of these improvements, the haft of my Megaboss's axe was looking spindly, so I layered it in a combination of green stuff and clay. When it was hardened, I cut slivers off of it to give the look of crudely carved wood. While I'd been trying to preserve his leg muscles, they were beginning to look odd, so I shaved them down and layered on clay to look semi-plausibly like armor. As a final touch, I added the horn breastplate from the Uruk War Chanter to either side of the Ironjawz to increase his silhouette. While I was pleased with how the Megaboss turned out, I also wanted to try and create a second version with the Cage Rager, this time doing what I had with my previous Orc Warboss by having a weapon resting on his shoulders with his hands slung over it. I started by filling out the blank sections and armoring his feet and shins. I didn't want to make an exact copy of my first Megaboss, and so for this one I decided to have the emphasis be less on armor and more on muscle. For his weapon, I picked the Megaboss axe again, but the original haft wasn't going to work, so I pinned it to a different pole and glued it to his shoulders. In this case, this was the easiest way to pose his hands and fingers so they draped over the weapon organically. For said weapon, I at first decided not to go full double axe again, and instead opted for adding this Uruk blade to the back like a pick. To the butt of the axe, I added the same mace as from the first Megaboss. These are the bracers from the Megaboss kit grown in size through molding and casting. They fit remarkably well. The axe I had put together wasn't quite big enough, so I switched it to another double-headed axe with a thicker haft, but still wasn't that happy with it. He just kind of looked like some weird lumberjack. I took off the axe blades and played around with the idea of these two brute maces as the flail part of a staff flail. It didn't feel quite chunky enough though, and honestly I wanted to save the idea for more dynamically posed conversion in the future, who could really sell a sense of mid-movement. I decided to wait on the weapon and give my Megaboss a chest plate. I hadn't meant to originally, but he just wasn't looking quite right without it. I used Procreate and green stuff to sculpt straps and an upper shell portion. For the weapon, I decided to go in a radically different direction. This is one of the hacking blades from the Brute kit, but molded and grown to double its size. I like how it looks like just a jagged shard of sharpened steel. With the increased size from the original Brute blade, it fit well across his shoulders, though obviously the left hand couldn't reach the top anymore. Instead, I posed it so it looks like he's just resting his hands against the flat of the blade. And with that, my Megabosses were ready for battle. I'm a little split on which I like more. While the first was a lot more work, I think I prefer the second just a tad. His energy is a little less busy, a little more bestial and focused. Which of the two do you prefer? Which do you like better? Let me know in the comments. If you did like the more armored Megaboss, you're in luck. I put him up on eBay, so if you want him, head over there and bid whatever you're comfortable with. Thanks for watching.